Our presenter today is Barry Altland. You can see him on the screen there. And Barry is a writer, speaker, thought leader, and the author of Engaging the Head, Heart, and Hands of a Volunteer. On your screen, we've got a picture of a cover of the book, which is a very popular, simple guide, which Barry, as Barry puts it, is about feeding the passion of those who serve. And I'll ask my colleague Jason to include a link to where you can pick up the book. That'll show up in your chat there. We'll soon learn about Barry's fresh perspective on volunteer engagement, which draws on his own vast experience as a volunteer and leader of volunteers in a wide range of organizations, everything from faith-based service organizations to homeowner associations, professional associations. He's worked with youth and athletic organizations and so on. And he is a sought-after consultant who has designed and facilitated hundreds of workshops and interactive learning experiences. And that's why, we're really pleased to have him on with us today. You can reach Barry through his website. I'll have Jason paste the link to the website there. And now I'm going to pass over the presentation to Barry. So Barry, I'm just going to mute myself and pass over the presentation to you. So you want to take over control. First of all, thank you so much for joining us, Barry.
Donald, thank you so much for having me. And what an honor it is to spend time together in learning with all of these participants who are leaders in volunteer-supported organizations. And what we're going to focus on is how you can get your volunteers to sustain their service through your organization. And how we're going to do that is through the story of a gentleman named Anthony. So Anthony is actually a volunteer with Matthew's Hope Ministries, a place where I've been blessed to serve for a number of years now. It's a homeless outreach ministry that serves West Orange County, Florida. And Anthony is a wonderful, wonderful man who has been dedicated to this ministry for quite some time. And his is an interesting story. He first came to the ministry because he was in job transition. And he's a bit of a quiet guy, not really outgoing. In fact, maybe even a little bit socially awkward, but yet a wonderful and kind man who is so willing and able to do pretty much anything that he is asked on behalf of the ministry. In fact, so much so that he was recognized over this past year with a specific award that the ministry gives out each year, and it's called the I'll Go Award. And this award, it is what it sounds like, is whenever you ask somebody to do something or to go somewhere, they're always the first one in a group to step forward and say, I'll go. And he was awarded this award, and he was set to receive this award in the very traditional sense at an annual recognition event that was happening back last February. And, it came along with an acrylic plaque, and he was going to be brought up in front of a group of people, and we were going to laud all of his merits and really recognize him and make him feel special, or so that was the vision. So here's the tragic part of the story, is that Anthony chose not to show up for that event that day. So it really begs the question, did we serve Anthony to the best of our abilities? And did we acknowledge his performance to the best way that we possibly could? So the reality is that Anthony's not really, even though he's the subject of this story, and he's a hero for the service that he provides to others in our community, he's not really the hero of this story. In fact, you are. Because if you're a leader of volunteers in your nonprofit organization or in your volunteer supported organization, you have this amazing opportunity to be able to touch the hearts of people who choose to serve through your organization. So chances are somebody is looking at you And they're thinking of you as the leader because you have an influence on their experience. And I love this image that you see before you. I Googled leadership some time back, and this was one of the images that came up, and I have latched onto it for the metaphor that it shares about leadership, because you see this mama duck actually in the back, and she's providing guidance and direction, but otherwise letting these ducklings step out and be a lead. And for me, this is a beautiful metaphor about what leadership, especially leadership for volunteers, looks like. And I find this fascinating that leadership, despite all of the books that have been written and all of the understanding that's out there and all the leadership development opportunities, that motivation, a central part of leadership, is something that is really not broadly understood. In fact, I was in Dallas with a professional association, was leading a program for 160 people. And I asked this question: there are only two types of motivation. What are they? And all of that room, except for one person, I could not get the answer from. So this one person raised their hand, and they shared that there are only two types of motivation: intrinsic and extrinsic. And the extrinsic motivation is that traditional carrot and stick mentality that we often think of when it comes to motivation. It's something that happens outside of us. But where it's really happening, I suggest for all types of people who choose to serve, but especially for volunteers, it's really about what's going on inside, their intrinsic motivation, that matters the most. It really is about encouraging and creating an environment where your volunteers can follow their passion and be able to do what they do best. So just a quick understanding about motivation, only those two types. And we're going to focus on intrinsic motivation, because the reality is that touching the heart, it's got to come from the heart. And you, the leader, you make that happen. Recognition is not about stuff. It's not about an event. It's about reaching in and touching the heart of your volunteers every single day and in every possible interaction where you get that opportunity. And in order for you to do that as a leader, you have to embrace this simple concept. It's called otherliness, and it's one of the central messages that's in my book. And even though it's really not a word in the English language yet, I do put that caveat in there. It's not a word yet. It does appear about 70 times in the book. And I define otherliness as placing the needs and the wants and desires of other people ahead of our own, which means that if there was a priority list and we would say our own needs as leaders, even the organization's mission and our goals and our objectives, in that moment of engagement, that we would place that individual volunteer's needs and wants and desires only slightly ahead or slightly above of where all of those other things fall. And when we do that, when we really seek to satisfy the needs, wants, and desires of an individual volunteer, then you have them in a place where they're able to serve at their best. And that's what we're going to focus on during our time together today. So Donald did mention this, and Jason reinforced it as well. Should you have any questions during our time together, if something that I say inspires a thought, then please, you're encouraged to enter that into the chat box, and I'm going to prompt Jason periodically to interject and to share any questions that might come in, and maybe even now is a good time to do that. So, Jason, what questions may have come in during our introductory piece?
Hi. So far we don't have any questions. I was actually going to jump in and just remind people that it is available. So if we get any in the next 10 minutes or so, I'll pop in and read them out to you.
Fantastic. So again, never hesitate. This really should be ideally a dialogue that happens between all of our participants, and I'll share a few thoughts along the way, because this is one. In fact, this is about to be entered into the second edition of the book of my writing. This is something that I developed after the book had been published, and it's called the Volunteer Life Cycle. And it's a really simple model that suggests that every single volunteer has a natural life cycle that's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. But more specifically, there are several critical phases along the way, and it begins with attraction and goes to discovery, which means finding out what's going on inside that volunteer's heart. And then you got them hooked. You have them engaged, and it's really your role as the leader, once they're at that phase, to be able to stretch the sustainment phase. And that's what that red line above the continuum right there represents. It's really about stretching sustainment for as long as possible before eventual redirection occurs. And that could be hours, it could be days, it could be months, it could be years or decades before you get to that redirection phase. And that's really what we encourage leaders to consider, is what can you do as a leader to be able to stretch the sustainment phase of your volunteers in their very natural life cycle. And one of the ways that you can do that is in the earlier steps, the earlier phase, which I call discovery. And in fact, I describe what I call the guide for engaging volunteers, which is really just a simple instruction or set of steps for leading a potential volunteer through a conversation. And when you hit a certain point, I refer to the flip. It's this idea of, instead of what we usually do, which is we go into what I call tell and sell mode, and we begin to really try to pitch the value and the virtue of volunteering in our organizations where we serve. Instead, what I encourage leaders to do is flip that conversation around and instead ask open-ended questions of the volunteer to discover what's in their heart and what could possibly be driving them that would compel them to consider wanting to serve as a volunteer in our organization. So this is the very first term of the 6 terms that we're referred to in the description for our session today. And let me give you some examples.
Before you keep going, we did get our first question here. So how do you keep volunteers from resenting each other's responsibilities?
From resenting each other's responsibilities?
Yeah, do you have any tips about that?
Wow, that's kind of a loaded question. And, gee whiz, it's so difficult to give a blanket answer to that because we're really speaking to specific dynamics of individuals in that case. But, to me, I served through a number of organizations where the possibilities of serving in a specific role, where that role is not really a singular role, but potentially it's a role that could be shared by others. So to me, that's a gut reaction to that question, is what are the possibilities of being able to share roles and responsibilities between more than one individual volunteer? And that may be a way of avoiding any sort of resentment by doing a little bit of job sharing or role sharing. So Jason, that's one thought that comes to mind.
Great, and I'll just follow it up with one other question here. Just if you could go over maybe some of the most common drivers for volunteers.
Yeah, in fact, I wrote about that quite a bit in the book, and there's a fair amount of research that's out there that it really speaks to the most common reasons why people choose to volunteer. I have purposely sidestepped that question because even though there could be a number of top categories of reasons why people choose to volunteer, ultimately none of that matters as much when we're dealing with an individual. And to me, it's not about finding out what most people, or the reason why most people choose to volunteer. It's about finding out specifically why that one individual who is in front of you is choosing to volunteer. And that's a slightly different way of thinking about it. It's really peeling away the macro view of volunteers and instead really looking at it at an individual or a micro view for your volunteers. And maybe here's the way that we get to that, is by asking a number of well-crafted, open-ended questions. And you're going to see a number that are on this list right here, such as, well, what brings you to this event? Or what attracted you to this organization? It's being able to find out what specifically that individual, what may be driving them. And then getting to know them a little bit better by asking, well, tell me more about your interests and hobbies. What do you like to do? Or what special skills or talents do you have that could benefit others if you shared them through this organization? And even the next one right there, where we say, talk about your passions. What gets you really excited about serving as a volunteer? And then we're starting to bring that conversation around a bit by thinking, well, what thought have you given to getting more involved, or maybe even take a professional angle? Describe your career goals. How could serving as a volunteer help you to grow and develop as a professional? And then really getting to the heart, what makes volunteering meaningful to you? So this is just a sampling of open-ended questions that goes back to the question that Jason had just asked. It's a bit more about the recommendation is finding out what specifically is driving that individual, what's compelling them in their heart. And here's what we discovered about Anthony, our volunteer. This is such a beautiful story, is that connection is so meaningful to him. He really views a number of our homeless guests who are served through this ministry as his friends. And even a few of our program members, these are folks who are a bit more committed to being able to rebuild their lives and repurpose their lives. He'll take them out for ice cream and spend time with them. Of course, he always has to ask permission to make sure that that's okay, that he's spending time one-on-one with our individual guests. But you know, it's all about connection to Anthony, and you really don't get that sense about him. You may not even get that sense about him as you look at these pictures until you really take the time to get to know him and understand who he is and figure out what makes his heart tick and drive him to be able to volunteer on behalf of this ministry. So he's a helper. He's a doer. He's a really good soldier. And through that one-on-one connection, we found out that what sustains Anthony throughout his volunteer life cycle is that opportunity to be able to engage with others. So one more thing, as we talked about Anthony and his receiving the I'll Go award, it really speaks to acknowledging his fine performance on behalf of this ministry. And what I've discovered is that in order for leaders to really get this right, we really need to redefine the ways that we choose to acknowledge volunteers for their service. And to me, it's about getting these 4 definitions crystal clear in our minds, because each of them is distinct and they're different. Appreciation, recognition, reward, and incentive. And gee whiz, there are many times and many leaders who take these 4 concepts and they just smash them all together as though they're one singular concept. And nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, they're very distinct. And we're going to go through each of them specifically so that you get a clearer sense that these are your leadership acknowledgement tools. And we're going to begin with appreciation, because appreciation is defined as a general expression of gratitude for presence, for demonstrated qualities and characteristics, and for a volunteer's overall contribution. So this is a general expression. That is appreciation. And appreciation is powerful because kind words don't cost a thing, and you can never say too many kind words. Here's the challenge of appreciation, is that when general expressions such as these types of appreciation statements, when they become the go-to for a leader, over time they start to ring hollow, and they may even make the leader appear like they're a little bit out of touch with what is really happening in the organization. But let me give you a better sense of what an appreciation statement might sound like. Something like this. I'd like to thank everybody on the team for being so loyal to the foundation. Your continued commitment to serving those in need really makes a difference in our community. And even though that could be true, and it may come from the heart of the leader, over time, these sort of general statements, not specific to any particular behavior, they have potential to really kind of sound a little bit humdrum after a bit, and maybe not quite as sincere as the leader intended for them to be. So I place emphasis instead on defining this word, recognition. Recognition, in contrast, is a specific expression provided in acknowledgement of having met or exceeded performance expectations, and recognition delivers intrinsic emotional value to the recipient. And that's the key part of the definition for recognition, is it delivers intrinsic emotional value to the recipient. And it may sound like I'm a little bit biased, maybe I am, but certainly when we talk about the advantages of recognition is that recognition relies on descriptive words, and it leverages something that some of you may be aware of, something called operant conditioning. In fact, if you are aware, or if you've ever given guidance to a pet, chances are you might know a thing or two about operant conditioning. And the cool thing is that it happens very much the same way with people as well, except that we get to use our words to be able to provide guidance and to really be able to reinforce the good that's happening. So that is operant conditioning, and ultimately recognition. It touches the heart. It has the ability to really reach in and touch somebody by using your words. And I do make this recommendation. In fact, I've written about it in the book.
Barry, just to, we have a question that I think is related and might tie into that last slide that you just said. Somebody's asking for advice as far as dealing with volunteers who are more interested in doing things their own way, as opposed to kind of taking into account the entire group of volunteers. For example, like their schedules, time needs, what they do or do not do, or dropping off of calls because they have other, what they consider more pressing things to do. So do you have any tips for dealing? Is the solution kind of this recognition piece you're talking about here?
Yeah, and maybe that's not addressed directly in recognition, but certainly, and I'm going to slide on to the next slide right here because it's maybe the answer to that is in this feedback model. It's called the RBI and BIF feedback model. And certainly when we talk about recognition, that's the R in the RBI that's right here. But maybe it's the other half of this model that I recommend following anytime that you choose to provide feedback to a volunteer on their performance. Maybe it's the BIF version. So I'm going to take these two and I'm going to just talk about them, but I'm going to flip them around because I want to address this question. Is when delivering feedback for improvement, because this certainly sounds like a volunteer who has some opportunities to grow and to step a bit more in line with the program. Of course, I would assess based upon the question, the way that I heard it is, how much of their behavior is truly a distraction and how much of it might be potentially acceptable so that you could offer a little bit of grace and forgiveness to this individual and still embrace their independent way of thinking about specific tasks. I know that I've had to let go in my leader of volunteers role. I've had to let go of the way that I would want something done and acknowledge that maybe there's more than one path to the same end. And this individual may have a different way of thinking about it. And I was able to get comfortable with that and embrace it. But if their behavior is something that can be distracting to others, then chances are they've got opportunities for improvement. And it's following this simple feedback model, which there are three elements of it. You see BIF, and you see the mnemonic out to the right. Think of Biff, the character from Back to the Future. And that's a great way to think about this because Biff was a bit of a bully and he needed to change his behavior. So think of BIF, behavior, impact, and future. And this is essentially what you would do is anytime that you offer a feedback statement to somebody, especially for their improvement, you would describe the behavior, that's the B, explain the impact of the behavior, that's the I, and then offer some sort of guidance or recommendation for the future, that's the F. And that's a great place to start because I do firmly believe that volunteers, every single one of them, even if you may not think so, they desire to know where they stand. And one of the greatest ways to do this is by offering them feedback on a consistent basis and molding and guiding their behavior before it gets to a level where it becomes a distraction to other volunteers. And through all of that, as I said, we have to mix in a little bit of grace and a little bit of forgiveness and embrace that there are many unique individuals who choose to serve through our organizations and being able to really meet them where they are. So it's not a wishy-washy answer, it's a real answer. It's embracing their humanity and their unique individualism, all the while addressing specific behaviors that might need to be improved. So all of that to say, we're going to flip back to the RBI which if you're a baseball fan, you know that RBIs are a good thing and you'd like to see that to continue to happen. And the B and the I are the same in both of these versions of the model, but the R is different. The R is recognition. And it's capturing somebody's attention with a superlative word like awesome, fantastic, phenomenal, way to go, whatever it might be. And you're able to really help that person get a greater sense of what they're doing and how much you as the leader desire for them to keep doing it. So here's an example of what recognition might look like that follows the RBI model. Troy, I noticed how amazing you were today handing out the water cups for runners during the 10K race. Your smile and your words of encouragement no doubt inspired a second win for many in the race. So that is a simple application of the RBI variation of this feedback model that we offered. And I'm hoping that helps to address a question. Here's the reality, folks, is that if you're in a leadership role, you've got a responsibility to offer ongoing feedback to all of your volunteers. And the better that you get at providing feedback for recognition as well as feedback for improvement, the more skilled you become at doing that, the more guidance and direction you're providing to your volunteers, which hopefully helps you to be proactive in the way that you're addressing any sort of concerns while you're reinforcing the good stuff that's happening, and hopefully helps you to avoid a bit more of the reactive conversations. So all of that to say, those are two of the four definitions. The third one that we want to touch on is reward. So reward is a tangible item provided in acknowledgement of having met or exceeded performance expectations, and a reward delivers extrinsic or even monetary value to the recipient. So let's compare and contrast recognition and reward just a bit more, because reward, by its definition, is a stimulus to increase the likelihood of a repeat performance. It doesn't guarantee that they're going to keep doing it, because the reality is that rewards do not stand on their own. Recognition, you using your words, you letting somebody know how they're doing and how well they're doing, that can stand on its own. But just giving somebody something tangible, an item, a tchotchke, a plaque, certificate, whatever it might be, it can be touched, but maybe it's not felt unless it's specifically in some way connected to the intrinsic drivers or the things that compel that person to volunteer. And that's the really key part here, is that we need to keep in mind that if ever we do offer a reward, and I'm not recommending it, in fact, there's an entire industry that is built on this principle that we need to give people stuff to somehow validate the work that they do on behalf of serving our organizations. And I, for one, am not a proponent of that, because I think that all the tools that you need are already at your disposal, and they don't require a budget. You can use your words to be able to reach in and touch the heart of a volunteer and let them know that what they do makes a difference, and that is truly felt. And that's my contrasting reward and recognition, obviously touting recognition just a bit more. Incentive is the last of our definitions right here, and it's a factor that drives or enables meeting or exceeding performance expectations. That's by providing something that is predetermined. In other words, you kind of know the deal going in that you're going to get something if you do something. Whereas reward is no prior agreement in place. And that's the way that we contrast those two. In fact, rewards, and especially recognition, they should arrive as a delightful surprise, whereas an incentive, and again, it can be effective in specific instances, but please don't allow incentive to be your go-to for recognizing your volunteers and then and ultimately trying to sustain their performance. So those are the four definitions that we look at: appreciation, recognition, reward, and incentive. And where they kick into gear is during that sustainment phase. You see that red line that stretches from the beginning of engagement all the way to potential redirection. And our goal is to make that last for as long as possible. So Jason, I'll kick it to you again and see if there's any further questions that might have come in.
Yes, we do. So what advice do you have to encourage volunteers to assume a leadership role within an organization? Do you have any sort of tips for getting them to transition from maybe a regular volunteer to something a little more involved in along those lines?
Yeah, and I'm going to leverage the specific words that you had just phrased in the question, because I'm not quite sure that you can get somebody who's a volunteer to transition into a leadership role unless they first feel called in that direction. Because the reality is that everybody could be a leader, but not everybody is meant to be a leader. And we really want those in our organizations, the volunteers who are serving, to those who desire to rise into leadership roles. Those are ultimately, to me, that's the number one factor, is they've got to want to move into more of a leadership role. Having a reluctant leader or somebody that has been goaded into that role is probably not going to provide the most healthful outcomes. So to me, it's about having meaningful conversations with your volunteers, trying to find out what it is that they desire to get out of their volunteer experience that would ultimately give you some insight and be able to provide a little bit more clue into what it is that they really like and what they want to achieve and how they want to grow. Because it's only when you get that insight that you're able to help position them into whatever it is that's going to feed that passion. And if it happens to be more of a leadership role, fantastic. But the reality is you probably don't find that out unless you ask the discovery question at the beginning of their time of service. And you're going to see we're about to transition in just a bit. If you continue to ask those questions through what I call coaching, which is having ongoing meaningful conversations where you get to receive those insights from the volunteers. So to me, it's all about ongoing conversations that will just help to answer those questions and help you to figure out who might want to actually step up and be more of a leader in the organization. Jason, what other questions might we have?
For now, that's it, but I will keep you updated towards the end, or maybe right at the end, and we'll go through the last few.
Fantastic. So as we touched on, discovery and recognition, those two are connected. And I did reinforce this, but I'll repeat it because it's worthy of repeating, that the reasons why somebody chooses to serve as a volunteer and the reasons why you choose to recognize them for that service should in some way be connected to their intrinsic drivers, connected to their passions, their needs, their wants, their desires, their reasons why. It's really about connecting to what matters to that individual and reminding ourselves that maybe it's not about a plaque. Maybe it's not about a trophy or certificate or anything like that, anything that's tangible, but maybe as it is for this wonderful man, Anthony, it's just placing him in roles where he can have these amazing connections with other people that brings him this deep sense of fulfillment in his life. So public praise, not Anthony's thing, not important to him at all. In fact, he came to me just after this volunteer appreciation event, and he said to me, you know, I feel appreciated every Tuesday. And here's what you see is you see Anthony serving on our what we call Tuesday Ministry Services Day, where we've got about 5 or 6 dozen of our homeless community in West Orange County, Florida, and they convene on us, and we provide them a number of services. And Anthony plays a critical role in not only providing these services to individuals, but also connecting with people who he considers his neighbors in the community. And that's what makes him feel appreciated. And he didn't feel any sense of having to have any additional events, or certainly not be called up in front of others. And the way that we found this out is through something I just alluded to, and that is something that I like to call coaching. And coaching is our 6th and our final term. So we had discovery, We had our 4 terms of appreciation, recognition, reward, and incentive. And now this is the 6th and final term that we're going to touch upon during our time together today, is coaching. Coaching is a practice of conducting regularly scheduled one-on-one discussions between you, the leader, and your volunteers. And that discussion is focused just on 2 things: focused on performance and focused on development. So let's just highlight a few of these words that are right here. Coaching conversations are regularly scheduled. So this isn't something that's off the cuff, but maybe you actually put it on a calendar and you have these on a periodic basis. There's no real recommendation for how frequently they should be occurring, other than maybe ask the volunteer how frequently they would like to sit down and have your undivided attention. So I've seen this be incredibly impactful in board situations, maybe in a professional association or in HOAs, or all manner of different volunteer-supported organizations, where this coaching practice, this idea of sitting down and having one-on-one discussions with others, can be a really powerful tool to be able to continue to gain those insights. So these are one-on-one discussions. These don't take the place of meetings, and meetings don't take the place of these one-on-one sit-down discussions. In fact, even in the corporate environment, sometimes they've been calling these stay interviews. And I think that's a brilliant way of thinking about this, is having an interview with somebody so that you would find out the things that are going to make them choose to stay and continue to serve in the organization. And really what we focus on is how are they doing in their role, and what are they doing in their role? That's their performance. And then ultimately, we want to focus on their development too, which is, it really speaks to how they grow in their role. And again, we're going back to open-ended questions. There is such power for you as a leader to develop this skill of asking open-ended questions. In fact, I spend several pages on this in the book, focusing on helping leaders to develop this skill of asking open-ended questions. And really the sky's the limit, as long as you begin these questions with who, what, when, where, why, and how. And when you're asking these questions, you as a leader, you get to drop that question in the conversation, and then you get to just shut up. And you get to just listen, and listen to these powerful insights that you'll gain from your volunteers when they let you know what's important to them and what drives them and what helps them to continue to make that choice to continue to serve on behalf of your organization. So even specific questions that you potentially could ask regarding recognition would be some questions that you see right here. And you'll see a couple of different font styles, and you see a couple different colors. And the unique nature of all of these, the very diversity that you see in which these questions appear in front of you, let that be a reminder to you that the sky is the limit. You could ask any number of different questions, even specific to how somebody might prefer to receive recognition. And it also reminds us that there is a unique relationship that each of us have with recognition. Some of us prefer to have our photo on a bulletin board. Others like the confetti and cake and balloons, whereas some others might want that message to be delivered private and one-on-one, or maybe by a personal or a handwritten note. So the only way that you can find out about ways that you can touch your volunteers and really touch what's in their heart and make recognition meaningful to them, the greatest way to do it is just to ask. So you can see that I am proponing for a specific type, a specific type of acknowledgement. And of these 4 right here, appreciation, recognition, reward, and incentive, I do believe that the golden treasure of recognition, the one on the top right corner right there, is going to be your lowest investment and highest return, because it's not necessarily about having a big budget for recognition, but it is an investment nonetheless. It's your investment as the leader to be able to use your words following the RBI feedback model, that variation of the feedback model, to let somebody know that what they're doing really makes a difference. So with that in mind, again, I'll go to you, Jason. Any questions that have arisen?
Yeah, sorry, Donald picking up here, because I've got a view of the questions. So got quite a few good ones here. So do you have any tips for developing the skills for providing recognition?
Gee whiz, there is no better way than to just jump in and do it. But as far as providing recognition, again, I go back to asking that individual about how they might want to receive that recognition. And here's something else that I recommend. In fact, I get to do this quite a few times in live workshops, where we get to actually apply this feedback model, and we do it by doing a written skill building exercise. And maybe that's the best way to do it, because coming up with all three elements of the RBI, that's a skill that's learned over time. But I've discovered that when you challenge somebody, you give them that model and you say, okay, I want you to provide feedback to somebody to let them know that they did something well. Most people can master the application of that model pretty quickly, but they're doing it in a written version. So maybe the secret to developing this skill is to actually take the time to write down that recognition statement to make sure that it's complete and it's got all three of the elements: the recognition, the behavior, and the impact. That's the RBI. And when you do that over time of writing it down and then maybe even reading it to the individual, you could read it to them one-on-one if they prefer it that way, or you could read it to them in a more public setting if they're of that style and they might prefer that. And when you do that, chances are over time, you're developing that skill, and before you know it, it's second nature to be able to include all of these elements of the RBI model, and you're giving even better, more sound feedback to your volunteers.
And great, thank you, Barry. And a couple of other ones we'd love to get to. What do you do when a volunteer in a secretary or director position suggests that they should be compensated for their time? How do you show value that doesn't involve a dollar amount?
Wow, yeah, that's, and again, that may be a bit outside of the scope of what we're discussing today. And, a lot of the right answer to how to address that situation is rooted in the individual dynamics that may be going on within the organization, and certainly between you, the leader, and that individual. But, to me, part of it may go back to, first of all, reminding the individual that this is the gig in which they volunteered for, and what they signed up for was essentially recognizing that this is a volunteer role, and it's not a compensated role, even though it brings a lot of value to the organization. And being able to help that person to understand that that's kind of the gig, that's what you signed up for, and that's what you raised your hand for. And at the same time, validating their contribution and the things that they're saying. I would also suggest that kind of question or that kind of statement, it could be scratching at something that's a little bit deeper rooted that may be an issue for this individual. So maybe it's a matter of having a pull aside conversation to say, hey, I know that you asked this question, so let's have an open and a frank discussion. And let's talk about what's really going on. And maybe you're able to get at some of the other frustrations or challenges that this person may be facing that led them to ask that question. Because to me, it would be a bit of a surprise, but it also may reflect that there's something a little bit more going on under the surface with that individual. An intriguing question, no doubt.
And here's one that I know a lot of our uh, associations that we're familiar with and clubs and things probably deal with. How our volunteer season is very short, June to August. How do we keep our volunteers engaged in the off season?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a lot of ongoing communication. In fact, we leverage through my ministry work and through some of the other outlets in which I lead volunteers. I believe in the power of social media. It's being able to continue to tell your story. It's getting all of your volunteers, while you have them as a captive audience, to like your page or to be a follower, and then to make sure that you are populating your, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter, whatever it might be, on an ongoing basis, that you're pushing out messages that remind people of their emotional connection to the organization. So email is a great way to do it. Social media is another great way to do it. And when you're using these different types of technology, maybe even it's a bit more low tech too. Maybe you can pick up the phone on occasion and reach out to somebody, or maybe you can have a gathering if folks are geographically close, you know, to be able to bring people together during that off season and be able to still sustain their emotional connection. And we have to really recognize that there is that natural volunteer life cycle that exists. And for some folks, they just may not return, or maybe their time of service was for that season and that season only. And we have to embrace that for what it is. But if you are really trying to work against that tide, to me, social media, email, it's all different types of communication that you have at your disposal that can really help you to sustain that emotional connection.
Wonderful. Thank you, Barry. And then when a volunteer role requires lots of extensive training, how can you keep a volunteer motivated over time to complete it?
Wow. Yeah, you know, I actually work with an organization that does what's called VITA, which is Volunteer Income Tax Assistance. And that's one of the things that they're really challenged with, because the preparation for this begins in the mid-fall. And of course, it runs all the way then until March 15th, which is the end, or excuse me, April 15th, which is the end of tax season. And it's quite a bit of time to be able to sustain the engagement. And there's a lot of preparation that goes into this with individuals. So to me, there is nothing that can replace what a leader can do to provide a personal touch with individuals. It is about coaching. It's about the ongoing check-ins. It's about acknowledging people in the moment and catching them in the act of doing great things. Because to me, this is the very essence of leadership. It's about connecting people to their work and to their service. And this is where the leader's role really kicks in. So to me, it's a lot of the things that we've been talking about. It's a little bit less about giving people stuff, and it's a little bit more about using your words and using your time, really, your time and your attention as a leader to be able to help individuals to stay connected to what they do, even over a longer period of time.
And thank you, Barry, again, as usual. Any suggestions on handling non-performance of volunteers, yet keeping their self-esteem?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And providing that feedback. In fact, I've dedicated an entire section of the book. It's probably the longest section of the book, because it's not an easy thing to be able to address. In fact, I have something, and I've done full webinars on this topic called the Volunteer Performance Analysis Model. And the reality is that this model really serves as a reminder to leaders that a lot of times our perception is that the performance problem is all the volunteers' fault. And it's really about them, and they need to either step up or step away. And the reality is that a lot of the challenges that volunteers face are really directly connected in some way to the things that we as leaders have influence over. And this model is a reminder to us to be able to say, well, hold on a second. Instead of jumping straight to this fight or flight approach of saying that, oh, well, you know what, either I'm just going to avoid this and pretend like it's not there and it'll eventually go away, which in reality never works, or maybe I look at this as a confrontation and I have to go right at it. And chances are I'm going to upset this person, and then they're not just going to go away, but they're going to go away mad. And they're not going to serve as an ambassador for this organization in the community, which even if you do end up parting ways with a volunteer sometime during their time of service, you still want them to go away as an ambassador for the organization, saying good things and having fond memories of their experience. So it's a bit of an art, but for me, it's about beginning with looking within as a leader and asking the question, what more could I have done as a leader to be able to make this experience the best that it could have been for that volunteer? Sometimes it's through those coaching conversations. It's asking the hard questions, but asking them proactively, not waiting until you have a performance problem that now you feel like you need to address, but instead having proactive conversations to say, what's the most challenging part of your role, or what are you really struggling with? What can I, as the leader, do to help you to overcome that? Or, what are some roadblocks and some obstacles that I can knock down for you that will ultimately help you to be able to do your best work? So those are hard questions, because we got to be prepared for whatever those answers that we might get to that question are. But ultimately, it's asking those challenging questions in a coaching conversation may give us the insights to let us be proactive as opposed to being reactive to the tough situations. Donald, what else we have?
Okay. So, what do you do about volunteers who say they'll show up and don't?
You know what? I assume that there was something different that distracted their attention, and you give them a ton of grace, and you just accept it for what it is, because chances are, you may want to place a phone call or send a follow-up email and just find out if anything might have happened. But the reality is that volunteering can sometimes be a bit fly-by-night in all of our organizations. And this volunteer life cycle, it can be brief, or it could be virtually non-existent, or it could be something that lasts for years and for decades. And leaving room for all of that, I believe, will ultimately help us to stop banging our heads against the wall and thinking about what different or what more or what different we could have done to be able to help that. And just maybe say, hey, chances are this person might have lost interest, or they found another way to apply their gifts, and all of that is okay. So at the very least, or the very most, what I might do is send a follow-up note or place a quick phone call. But beyond that, I'm not sure that I would invest a lot of additional time chasing a volunteer who didn't show up for the first time. Maybe not the answer that they were looking for, but that's my honest opinion.
Great, Barry. And why don't we do just one last question, because we're getting close to the top of the hour. This might be a broad question, but maybe you can. There's a pithy answer from you. But what do you do when you ask questions of volunteers, and they might not be aware of what is really inside them, and also they might not want to reveal the truth.
It's not been my experience. In fact, when you really, as a leader, you invest the time to show that interest in the individual, especially if they're really sincere about their desire to want to get more involved in your organization, chances are they're going to deeply appreciate the fact that somebody even bothered to ask. And I found that most people are in tune with what their likes are and what their dislikes. So maybe it's a matter of getting crafty with the way that the question is asked, to be able to find out, what do you like to do? What do you not like to do? In your past volunteer experiences, what is something that may have put a bit of a gray cloud over your experience? So there's all different kinds of ways that we could ask the question to be able to really get at that. And so maybe it's not so much the needs, wants, and desires questions in such a straightforward way, but maybe it's a different way of approaching it to get that person to open up. But my experience tells me that most folks kind of have a sense of what's going on inside their heart, and they're usually pretty willing to share it.
Well, thank you so much, Barry. And of course, the fact that you draw on your expertise and your vast experience, I think, provides, I found those insights quite valuable, and I hope everybody else did today. So I want to thank you very much. We're snuggling up to the top of the hour. So thank you very much, Barry. I really, really appreciate it.